who created the world, who is supremely good, and who is a fit object of worship. This is the God whose existence I wish to deny. This is the central concept of God in the Western tradition. There may be other concepts of God, but I'd rather not be compelled to take aim at a moving target. I can tackle only one God at a time. That's enough, I take it. In the history of philosophical and theological thinking, there have been many attempts to provide evidence or proofs of God's existence. But the argument that seems to have been the most popular and most influential is the so-called argument from design. For reasons that should become clearer later, I would prefer to call it the argument from order to design. It is an argument with a long history. Clear versions of it can be found in Aquinas. It is the fifth of the 5 famous proofs we get introduced to in philosophy courses. But its heyday was in the 18th and 19th centuries, when the notion that the world is essentially like a machine governed by mechanical laws was so very popular. The classic formula can be found in William Paley's famous comparison of a watch and the world of nature. If we were to come upon a watch, we would immediately conclude that it must have been designed. No operation of either chance or other natural forces could have brought about this curious, perfect adaptation of means to end. For Paley, the world of nature, his favorite example is the eye, exhibits the same curious adaptation of parts to whole so as to bring about some end. If the watch was caused by design, then by all the rules of analogy, the world of nature must have been brought about by design as well. As Hume would put it, similar effects must have similar causes. It follows, at least with a high degree of probability, that nature too is brought about by the design of an intelligent mind, one like a human mind but proportioned to the grandeur of the work. This argument has a number of advantages over other, more metaphysical arguments. In the first place, it is a relatively simple argument, and thus is open to appreciation by nearly everyone, not only the theologically elite. Moreover, if it works, it does provide reason for believing in the existence of something like the God of traditional theism. Presumably, God's wisdom must be vastly superior to man's to account for the amazing intricacy of his work. Secondly, as is true of the works of human design, we can learn something of the mind of the Creator by studying his creation. And thirdly, as any of us who cares about the fruits of our labor, it would seem likely that God would exhibit providential care for his creation as well. So from a religious point of view, the argument has a good deal to be said on its behalf. However, the argument is seriously flawed, as David Hume showed with great skill in his dialogues concerning natural religion. Time does not permit a full discussion of Hume's critique, but a few of the main points can be noted. In the first place, the analogy is not an especially strong one. What the world of nature and the world of machines have in common is that they both exhibit order. The argument would lead us to believe that it is only order by itself that leads us to the conclusion that the watch is designed. But that is not so. We conclude that the watch is designed because we have had prior experience of things like watches, which we know to have been caused by design. It is that past experience of similar cases which justifies the inference to a watchmaker. As Hume would have it, all causal inference is tacitly based on appeal to the general features of our experience. However, universes are not as plentiful as watches. Think of it this way. Suppose the old proverbial ignorant savage came upon our watch. What would he conclude? Not having experience of anything like a watch, he might not know what to conclude. He might conclude that it was alive if it was still operating and running. More than likely, he would do as we have done and attribute the watch to a god. You have, I hope, seen the film, The Gods Must Be Crazy. But what should he have concluded? If he were rational, but uninformed about things like watches, well, what should he conclude? Nothing. Having no past experience upon which to draw, he should conclude that he has no idea what the cause of the watch is, or even if it has a cause. Well, we are to the universe as our savage is to the watch. We should remain silent. Secondly, think about what it is about machines that causes us to conclude that they are designed. Better yet, think about how an anthropologist sets about deciding whether a particular object is or is not manufactured. Artifacts, unlike what occurs naturally, show the marks of being tooled. When I tour our engineering labs, I have no idea what all those contraptions are or what they're for. But I conclude that they are designed, not because they exhibit order, but because they show the marks of having been tooled. Again, mere order, in the absence of other information drawn from past experience, tells me nothing about the cause of order, or if that order even has a cause. So the argument from order to design, construed as an analogical argument, is not a very strong argument. The analogy upon which the argument is based, comparing the natural order to a machine, is simply a weak analogy. Hume makes another point which in certain respects is even more devastating, as it gets at the heart of his charge that the argument is essentially anthropomorphic. If one assumes that the analogy upon which the argument is based is a strong one, what conclusions does the theist want to draw, besides the one that the universe is designed? There are several other conclusions that are fundamental to traditional theism. First, that the universe is designed by one being. Second, that the universe is designed by the being that created it. Third, that the universe was created from nothing. Fourth, the designer of the universe is a purely spiritual being and is not a material or physical thing. And fifthly, the designer is all good, all powerful, and all wise. But if the analogy is strong, that is, if the universe is enough like human artifacts to justify the inference from order to design, these other equally central conclusions do not follow. For example, with respect to machines and human design, the more complex the machine, the more likely it was designed by a number of persons. The more likely that there would be a division of function, perhaps. Perhaps it would be made by a person other than its designer. Furthermore, we have no experience of design which brings something into being from nothing, but rather things are created from pre-existing material whose existence is independent of the activity of design, as I might design a house and make it from wood. Moreover, this independent material must already exhibit an order independent of my design, if I'm to make anything at all. All design, which culminates in creation in the human realm, necessarily involves some use of the body to manipulate building materials. Even literary creations must at least be spoken or written, both of which involve the body. And finally, no conclusion regarding the infinity of the deity can be drawn from any such argument. Even if there were only one such designer and creator, all we would be entitled to conclude would be that this being must be sufficiently good, sufficiently powerful, and sufficiently wise to have created the world as we experience it. So if the analogy between artifacts and nature were a strong analogy, and we stick to the principle that similar effects have similar causes, then what we ought to conclude from the argument is that there are many gods with different functions who have bodies and created this world by rearranging pre-existing material. As Hume so nicely put it, quote, "Behold the cosmogony of ancient times brought back before us." So contrary to its defender's intent, what this argument actually supports is some ancient form of polytheism, hardly a welcome outcome for theists. The usual response to this is that Hume is overlooking the fact that divine design is totally unlike human design. Well, perhaps so. But then the defender of the argument is between a rock and a hard place, as Hoosiers would say. The analogy is either a strong one, in which case polytheistic conclusions follow, not theistic ones, or the analogy is remote, in which case no conclusion can be drawn at all. You can't have it both ways. Perhaps the most distressing consequence of Hume's critique is that the moral attributes of the deity are equally difficult to fathom with the resources of the design argument. One could talk about the problem of evil for a good long time. How do you square the goodness and omnipotence of God with the evil and suffering in the world? Either God is not all good, since he obviously allows evil he could easily have prevented, or he is not all powerful, since he's unable to eliminate evil. Theists have a whole history of responses to this problem. Free will is probably the favorite. Evil is the result of human choice. If God were to prevent evils that result from human choice, then we would only be automatons. Moreover, unless there are evils in the world, dangers to